The biting Arctic wind lashed the deck of the CCGS Amundsen as I checked the communication equipment that morning. As the communications officer of the Canadian Research and Rescue vessel, it was my duty to monitor any emergency signals. The daily routine on board was predictable: system checks, weather reports, communications with the base and other vessels in the region. But on that particular morning, something shattered the monotony of the frozen waters. That was when the unthinkable happened. A faint but unmistakable SOS signal flickered on our receiver. My heart immediately raced. In Arctic waters, a distress call rarely had a happy ending. I double-checked the coordinates, making sure I wasn't making a mistake. Everything pointed to a real emergency. "Captain Olsen, I picked up an emergency signal from Sector 7, latitude 82 north," I shouted, barely containing the urgency in my voice. Captain Eric Olsen, a man seasoned by years in icy waters, quickly approached my station. His blue eyes, hardened by decades at sea, examined the coordinates on the monitor with an intensity that made everyone around us fall silent. No one questioned Captain Olsen's authority. His 30 years navigating the Arctic earned him the utmost respect from the crew. "Sector 7? There's no registered expedition in that area right now." He frowned, the wrinkles on his face deepening under the cold cabin light. "How long has the signal been active?" I adjusted a few controls, trying to extract more information from the fragmented transmission. "Hard to say, sir. It's intermittent, but the digital signature suggests it may have been repeating automatically for weeks." That realization hit me like a wave of freezing water. Weeks meant that whoever was out there had likely been struggling to survive for a long time. The captain made his decision immediately, without a moment's hesitation. That was what I admired about him, the certainty in the most critical situations. "Change course to Sector 7, all rescue teams on alert. Dr. Lapointe, prepare the infirmary for potential hypothermia cases." The crew sprang into action instantly. The helmsman recalculated the route, the engineers increased the engine power, and the medical team began preparing supplies for possible survivors. I alerted the Coast Guard about our course change and the potential rescue operation. We had to consider all possibilities, from a small group of researchers to a vessel with dozens of crew members. Over the next 12 hours, the Amundsen forced its way through the frozen sea, breaking ice sheets with its reinforced hull. The sound of ice yielding under the ship's force was constant, a fitting soundtrack for our urgent mission. I remained at the communications station, repeatedly trying to establish contact with the source of the signal, but with no success. As we approached the coordinates, the sense of urgency was replaced by something more unsettling. No further contact was possible with the source, only the same automatic pattern, repeating endlessly. It was like listening to an electronic ghost, a message from the past echoing through time. A wave of unease spread through the ship like an electric current. No one spoke much, but the glances exchanged among the crew said it all. We were prepared for the worst, but still hoping for the best. The Arctic did not forgive mistakes. We all knew that. Every minute counted, even if the signal suggested that we might already be too late. It was Marie, our glaciology specialist, who spotted the camp first. She was on the upper deck, using high-powered binoculars to scan the white horizon. "3 o'clock, about a kilometer away!" she shouted, her French-accented voice carrying a mix of relief and apprehension. I quickly joined the captain on deck. Through my binoculars, I could see several orange tents against the endless white, but no visible movement. The bright orange, specifically chosen to be seen against the landscape, looked eerily out of place in that frozen desert. It was like a silent scream for help in the middle of nowhere. "No signs of life," I murmured to Captain Olsen beside me, lowering the binoculars. He nodded grimly, his features hardened by the sight before us. "Prepare the helicopter and the advance team," he ordered, his voice calm despite the tension of the moment. I was assigned to the first team along with James, our doctor, Marie, and Sørensen, the ice rescue specialist. As we prepared, checking our gear one last time, I noticed no one was talking about what we might find. Maybe that was for the best, focusing on the task, not the possibilities. The short flight to the camp was silent, each of us mentally preparing for whatever lay ahead. James kept checking his medical kit repeatedly, a nervous habit that betrayed his apprehension. Marie studied a map of the region, trying to understand why anyone would choose that specific location for a camp. Sørensen, with his experience in countless Arctic rescues, remained calm, but his sharp eyes never stopped scanning the terrain below. As the helicopter neared, the camp's desolation became more apparent. There were no recent footprints in the snow, no smoke from the tents, no human movement. A sense of foreboding settled in my chest. Upon landing near the tents, the absence of any activity became even more disturbing. We stepped out cautiously, the sound of the helicopter's rotors gradually fading until it was swallowed by the absolute silence of the Arctic. Everything was covered by a thin layer of snow, indicating that no one had been there for a long time. "This place has been abandoned for months," Sorensen confirmed after a preliminary perimeter inspection. His trained eyes noticed details the rest of us missed. The way the snow had accumulated against the tent walls, the lack of recent tracks, the arrangement of the external equipment. We split up to examine the camp, following search protocols. James, the doctor, was particularly tense, prepared to find victims, yet dreading what he might discover. Inside the main tent, we found research journals, scientific equipment, and intact supplies. The meticulous organization typical of field scientists was still present, but there was an unsettling layer of abandonment over everything. I quickly flipped through the last available journal, noting the precise entries and carefully recorded data. The final entry was dated 4 months ago, a Norwegian expedition studying temperature anomalies in the ice. The logs showed a progression of scientific discoveries, but also a growing obsession with something they had detected beneath the ice. The last entry briefly mentioned the discovery of a subglacial cave and plans to explore it the next day. And then, nothing. The following pages were blank, as if the story had been abruptly cut off. I looked over at Marie, who was examining some of the scientific instruments left behind. "Why would they abandon such valuable equipment?" she asked, holding up a state-of-the-art radiation meter. "This thing costs more than I make in a year." James, who was checking the medical supplies, added, "And the medicine is practically untouched. No one leaves for a rescue mission without taking the first aid kit." Meanwhile, I kept monitoring the distress signal with my portable equipment. The reading confirmed what I had already suspected, yet hesitated to accept. "The signal is still active," I informed the others, following the readings on my detector. "And it's coming. From beneath us." The signal flashed on my detector with a steady rhythm, its waves forming familiar patterns on the small screen of the device. I looked again to confirm what my eyes had already registered. The source was definitely below us, somewhere deep within the ice. Marie consulted the maps left behind by the expedition, carefully spreading them out on a makeshift table in the main tent. Her fingers, protected by thin precision gloves, traced lines and markings on the worn paper. "There's an opening about 100 meters from here," she informed us, pointing to an area marked with red symbols. "It looks like they set up a rope system to descend." Sorensen examined the notation over her shoulder, his face revealing a mix of professional curiosity and caution. "A subglacial cave in this region is extremely rare," he remarked. "The ice here should be solid all the way down to the bedrock." As we discussed our options, I maintained contact with the Amundsen, informing Captain Olsen of our findings and the probable location of the signal. His voice crackled over the radio, distorted by static, yet still carrying that unwavering authority that inspired confidence, even in the most uncertain situations. "You have fuel in the helicopter for 3 more hours, he calculated. "I want you back before then, regardless of what you find. Understood?" "Yes, sir," I replied, exchanging glances with the rest of the team. After reporting to the Amundsen, we were cleared to investigate the signal's origin, as long as we maintained constant communication. We gathered additional equipment from the abandoned tents, extra flashlights, ropes, high-strength carabiners, anything that might be useful for a descent into the unknown. Following the coordinates on the Norwegian expedition's maps, we located the cave entrance, a dark fissure in the ice, like a wound in the pristine white surface. The safety cables were still secured in deeply embedded ice anchors, disappearing into the darkness below. The setup was impressively professional, with redundancies and reinforcements that spoke to the experience of the missing team. 1,000 meters deep, Marie murmured, examining the colored markings on the main rope. Her normally composed face showed genuine astonishment. I've never seen a glacial formation like this before. It's impossible. James, ever practical, checked his medical gear once more before looking at each of us. We're going down to search for survivors, but we also need to be prepared to find... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Equipped with lights, radios, and climbing gear, we began our descent. We established a communication system. Every 100 meters, we would pause to check our supplies, vital signs, and surface contact. Sorensen led the descent, followed by Marie, then James, and I took the rear, keeping constant contact with the ship. The first 200 meters were relatively straightforward, the vertical tunnel dropping in a straight line through the blue crystalline ice. The light from our headlamps cast ghostly patterns on the frozen walls, revealing air bubbles trapped for millennia, and occasional layers of sediment that told the geological history of the region. At 300 meters, the tunnel began to widen, occasionally opening into larger chambers. These formations were breathtaking, cathedrals of ice with crystalline stalactites and stalagmites that glittered like diamonds under our lights. Under any other circumstances, we would have stopped to admire, photograph, study. But the urgency of our mission and the mystery of the signal pushed us downward. Yet what struck me the most was the silence. An absolute silence so profound that I could hear my own blood pulsing in my temples, the rhythm of my breath echoing inside my helmet. It was an ancient silence, primordial, as if we had stepped into a realm that existed before humanity itself. How is it possible that no one has discovered this before? Marie asked during our break at 500 meters, her voice amplified through our helmet comms. A cave of this magnitude should have been detected by radar or other means. Maybe it was, Sorensen replied enigmatically, adjusting his ropes. Not all discoveries in the Arctic are made public immediately. We continued our methodical descent, each meter taking us deeper into a world that seemed less and less like it belonged to our familiar planet. Surprisingly, the temperature did not drop as expected. In fact, at 600 meters, our sensors registered a slight increase. This matches the journals, Marie commented. They mentioned thermal anomalies. It could be geothermal activity beneath the ice. At 700 meters, the radio began to experience interference. My reports to the Amundsen became shorter and more spaced out, limited to moments when we could get a clearer signal. Captain Olsen expressed concern but did not order us to return. He trusted our judgment and the importance of the mission. At 800 meters, we found the first direct sign of the expedition. A frozen glove wedged between two ice formations, like a ghostly hand emerging from the wall. Sorensen examined it carefully without removing it. Norwegian Polar Institute, he read from the inner tag. Definitely from the expedition we're looking for. The silence after that discovery weighed on us. It was no longer an abstract search. Real people had come down here before us. People who might never have made it back to the surface. At 900 meters, the tunnel expanded dramatically, forming a chamber so vast that our lights barely reached the ceiling. The ice here had a different quality, more translucent, with dark veins running through it that seemed to pulse under our illumination. We're looking at something very few humans have ever seen, James murmured, his voice carrying a mix of awe and apprehension. At 950 meters, we found abandoned excavation equipment, a high-powered ice core drill, left as if its operators had simply dropped it and fled. The drill was partially embedded in the ice wall, suggesting that the operation had been abruptly halted. Why would anyone abandon such expensive equipment? James questioned, examining the device without touching it. The signal is much stronger now, I reported, checking my detector. We're almost there. The last 50 meters were the hardest, not because of the climb itself, but because of the growing tension tightening in our chests. Something about this place, perhaps its alien vastness, perhaps the mystery of its abandonment, created a primal anxiety, an instinctual unease that went beyond rational thought. Then we heard it, a low sound, almost imperceptible at first. A kind of sliding, like something enormous moving against the ice. Our eyes met, each face reflecting the same silent question. "Did you hear that?" James whispered, his voice trembling slightly inside our helmets. No one answered immediately. There was no need. We had all heard it. Marie checked her instruments. No seismic activity detected. Whatever it is, it's not a natural ice shift. We continued our descent with heightened caution, every movement measured, every sound amplified by our sharpened awareness. 1,000 meters below the surface, precisely where the map indicated, the tunnel opened into a massive chamber, at least the size of a football field. The scale was disorienting after hours confined in the narrow tunnel. At the center of this vast subglacial cathedral, we identified the source of the signal, an improvised radio station mounted on an elevated platform. The equipment was still operational, its lights blinking in a repetitive sequence, thanks to its long-lasting batteries specially designed for extreme conditions. Incredible, I murmured, approaching the station. The transmitter had been set to send an automatic S.O.S. signal in an endless loop, a silent testament to human ingenuity, functioning faithfully long after its creators had vanished. I connected my device to the transmitter, attempting to extract any stored data or messages, while the others explored the chamber, their flashlights casting dancing beams of light against the walls of ancient ice. Why would they leave the equipment behind? Sorensen questioned, examining the radio with experienced curiosity. And more importantly, why set it to transmit indefinitely if they intended to return to the surface? It was a question none of us could answer, and one that would soon be forgotten in the face of a much more disturbing discovery. It was when Marie's thermal camera picked up something. The colorful patterns on the device's small screen displayed an anomaly that shouldn't have been there, a moving heat signature. "There's movement in the water," she said, her normally controlled voice now trembling with astonishment. Her finger pointed toward a subglacial lake at the edge of the cave, a stretch of still, black water we hadn't initially noticed. Something big. We aimed our lights at the dark surface of the water. The beams from our flashlights cut through the absolute darkness, reflecting off the water like a luminous road. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence was so deep that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding against my ribs. Then I saw it. We all saw it. 3 serpentine shapes emerging simultaneously from the water, each crowned with something resembling a head. It was a moment of pure disbelief, as if we were witnessing something our brains refused to fully process. "My God!" I heard James's voice beside me, almost a whisper of reverence and terror. The creature was gigantic. Each of the 3 heads the size of a car, with pale, blind eyes adapted to eternal darkness. Its bizarre, scaly body radiated a cold I could feel even through my thermal suit. The scales looked ancient, as if they were made of ice compressed over millennia, moving with an unsettling fluidity for something so massive. We stood frozen, unable to flee or even look away. It was as if we were facing something that should not exist in our world, preserved in the depths of the ice. "Don't move," Sorensen whispered, his experience in life-or-death situations manifesting instinctively. "Don't make a sound." But it was too late. The 3 heads turned toward us simultaneously, as if they could sense our presence. There were no visible eyes, only dark sockets where they should have been, but somehow I knew we were being watched, studied, assessed. A deafening hiss filled the chamber, reverberating off the ice walls and amplifying until it reached an almost unbearable volume. The creature began to haul itself out of the water with surprising agility for its size, its massive body leaving a trail of freezing moisture on the cave floor. Our radios crackled to life with the urgent voice of Captain Olson. He was watching everything through the cameras in our helmets, witnessing the horror alongside us. "Run!" he shouted over the radio, his voice cutting through our collective trance. "Climb now!" He didn't have to say it twice. Instinct took over, and our carefully planned formation dissolved into a desperate sprint toward the tunnel that would lead us back to the surface. Our ascent was a blur of panic. We climbed the vertical tunnel with a speed born of sheer terror, ignoring safety protocols, yanking the ropes with brutal force, propelled by adrenaline and the fear of the unknown pursuing us. Below us, the sound of the creature approaching echoed through the ice walls, a wet, heavy slithering, punctuated by that unnatural hiss that seemed to pierce directly into our brains. Sorensen, the last in line, screamed as one of the heads reached for his boot. His cry froze my blood more than anything I had ever experienced. I looked down and saw, illuminated by the flickering beam of my flashlight, a sight that would haunt me forever. The serpentine head stretching upward, jaws open, revealing rows of crystalline teeth like icicle stalactites. But Sorensen was no rookie. With quick reflexes, he managed to kick the creature's head away and keep climbing, his muscles working with the strength of pure desperation. At 500 meters from the surface, we felt the entire cave tremble. It wasn't a subtle vibration. It was as if the whole cave system was destabilizing. Small ice fragments began falling around us, first like light snow, then in larger, more dangerous chunks. "The ice is cracking!" Marie shouted, her scientific training allowing her to analyze the situation even amid panic. "The creature is destabilizing the entire structure." It wasn't hard to understand why. The creature was enormous, far bigger than any known animal, and its movement through the narrow tunnels was literally tearing apart ice formations that had remained stable for millennia. At 400 meters, I heard a deafening crack below us, like an entire wall of ice had given way. The furious roar that followed confirmed my suspicion. Part of the tunnel had collapsed, possibly trapping the creature temporarily. At 300 meters, Marie, usually the calmest among us, started reciting scientific data almost like a mantra, an anchor for her sanity amid the chaos. This structure is at least 100,000 years old, late Pleistocene glacial formation. Impossible for something to have survived. Impossible. At 200 meters, we lost contact with the Amundsen. Static replaced Captain Olsen's reassuring voice, heightening our sense of isolation. We were on our own, fleeing from something modern science could not explain, something that defied our understanding of the natural world. At 100 meters, another tremor shook the cave, more violent than the last. James, just above me, nearly lost his grip on the rope, but managed to steady himself at the last moment. "We're almost there!" Sorensen shouted, now leading the group. "Don't stop! Don't look back!" At 50 meters from the surface, our last hope nearly slipped away. Ice-cold water began seeping through cracks in the walls, making the rope slick and nearly impossible to hold. The temperature plummeted, and our equipment began to freeze. "The water pressure is increasing," Marie gasped between labored breaths. "The entire system is collapsing." The final meters were a battle against time, against physics, against nature itself. My fingers were numb, my legs burned with effort, and my lungs ached from the icy air. But fear was a more potent fuel than anything else, pushing me upward when my muscles had nothing left to give. When we finally emerged from the cave, the helicopter was already waiting, rotors spinning, the pilot frantically waving for us to hurry. The Arctic sky had never looked so beautiful, the freezing air never so sweet. We had barely boarded when the entire sheet of ice around the cave entrance collapsed, forming a rapidly expanding sinkhole. The sight of the white surface shattering like broken glass was mesmerizing, terrifying and magnificent at the same time. "Get us out of here!" the pilot yelled, pulling the controls to lift the helicopter. As we gained altitude, I saw something that made my heart stop. A dark shadow moving beneath the fractured ice, something enormous following the growing pattern of cracks. Then, black water erupted from multiple fissures, forming geysers that froze instantly in the Arctic air. By the time the helicopter turned toward the Amundsen, the last fragment of the cave's entrance had disappeared, swallowed by the abyss that had formed. If there was any sign of the creature emerging to the surface, it was hidden by the distance and the rapidly forming mist over the exposed water. Back on the Amundsen, no one questioned our decision to leave immediately. The footage from our cameras was evidence enough of the monstrosity we had encountered. Captain Olsen, after watching the recordings in his private cabin, emerged paler than usual, but with his determination intact. "Prepare to set sail," he ordered. "Course for Longyearbyen, full speed." As the ship moved away, I spent hours analyzing the recovered data from the abandoned radio station. There were fragments of messages, weather records, and what appeared to be the beginning of a formal distress call, abruptly cut off. The recovered diary from the Norwegian expedition finally made sense. Its last pages, which we fully translated only during our journey back, spoke of something ancient awakening in the depths. The researchers had noticed subtle changes in the composition of the ice, inexplicable thermal anomalies, and, eventually, sounds coming from within the ice itself. Sounds that led them to discover the cave, and ultimately, the subglacial lake. The final entry, written in trembling handwriting, simply said, "It is not a fossil. It is alive. God help us. It is alive. And it is waking up." The official report we submitted to the authorities was deliberately vague. We mentioned the missing expedition, the automated distress signal, and a glacial collapse of undetermined cause. The recordings were classified as confidential by direct order of the Minister of Defense after a brief and tense video conference. Sometimes, I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling the cold of that place, hearing the hiss of those three heads. Sweat turns icy on my skin as I relive those moments in the depths of the ice. Captain Olson submitted a full report to the authorities, but I doubt anyone truly believes what we found. Maybe that's for the best. There are things in the depths of the Arctic that should remain buried beneath the eternal ice. Now I understand why that Norwegian expedition chose to disappear silently, rather than reveal to the world what had awakened. The occasional news reports about unexplained seismic anomalies in the Arctic make my blood run cold. I know no one would believe me if I told the truth. Who would believe that in the frozen depths of the North, something ancient and terrible awaits? Something that existed before humanity, and will likely exist long after we are gone? But I know what I saw. I know what is down there, and I pray that it remains there, asleep once more in the depths, where sunlight never reaches, and where, I hope, no human will ever again disturb its millennia-old slumber.